A very warm welcome to IDFC First Bank Presents Leaders of Tomorrow Season 13. I'm Ritwika Gupta and you're watching our Independence Day special episode. As India navigates its place in a shifting global economic order, how can businesses turn geopolitical tensions and trade disruptions into strategic advantages? What does being Atmanirbhar truly mean in practical economic terms? And how do we cultivate entrepreneurial thinking in our youth to shape a future-ready India? Joining me tonight to share his macro-strategic insights on these critical questions is none other than Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister. Thank you, Mr. Sanjeev, for joining us today on our Independence Day special episode.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So to begin our conversation, I want to know, how do you view India today? You have often argued for bold India-specific policy making. Where do you see India positioned today in the shifting global economic architecture?
So what is happening globally, which is visible to all of you, is quite obvious. I mean, the old WTO-based, so-called rule-based order is breaking down. Now, frankly, as an emerging power, we shouldn't be entirely unhappy about this, because that rule-based order was not built with rules where anybody asked us what those rules were. We just were rule takers. So in that sense, in the medium term to long term,
sure,
we should be not unhappy about this. But nonetheless, it is true that we are facing a lot of turbulence for now. And so it makes it somewhat difficult to sail in these seas. Now, what do we do under these turbulent situations? It is becoming quite clear to us that as this WTO run world order breaks down, and this is not just in trade, so it's also the wider so-called liberal world order breaking down even in geostrategic terms, we will probably end up with the following situation in the world, and I'm guessing here, so take it with a pinch of salt. What we will probably end up with is a network of bilateral relationships and treaties around the world. So rather than have one big set of rules which everybody has to comply with, you'll now have a network of bilateral relationships. In that, there will be two centers of gravity. One of them will be the US and the other will be China. We ourselves eventually will become a center of gravity, but for now we have to allow for the fact that we basically have to function in this network, and as a part of that effort, we are creating these free trade agreements with a whole host of countries, whether it is, you've seen the recent ones with Australia and the UK, there were pre-existing ones with the UAE and Japan and so on. So that's what we are doing, and we are trying now to negotiate with the US and the European Union for having some bilateral trade agreements with them as well. So this is how we are trying to keep the channels of trade open. This is not to suggest that we will not trade with other countries. We have kept out of RCEP, but we will trade with China. Indeed, for goods trade, China is our biggest source of import. So we will continue to trade with them. They are, after all, the source of many inputs, and frankly, it's difficult to function in the world without having a relationship with China. So, but nevertheless, you will see this us kind of making our way through this somewhat turbulent environment through this network of FTAs.
So how would you say Indian businesses should interpret ongoing trade wars and geopolitical frictions? Should they see these headwinds as risk zones or opportunity windows to claim new ground?
Well, they are both. I mean, in the shorter term, obviously, as I just mentioned, it is turbulent. But longer term, let's be very clear, as we emerge as a global power, we will have much bigger ability to negotiate a better position for ourselves in the world. Now, that does require us to be out there and take risks and try to take advantage of the opportunities. One obvious one, as I mentioned, if you're going to end up with two centers of gravity, and then there will be situations where the US, for example, will want to create sources of supplies and diversify away from China. Again, something we can exploit. There will also be the European Union, which has itself wants to diversify, not just from China, but even thinking of diversifying from the United States for many things. So there will be opportunities here, but in each one of them we have to invest effort into creating that bilateral relationship, and we have to be out there. We have to play this on the front foot. We have to be out there taking markets, and of course on our side creating spaces for whether it's global capability centers, or foreign direct investment to come in. I mean, so the greatest danger in all of this turbulence is to try and hide behind protectionist walls, whereas in fact the thing to do is to go out and take advantage of the unsettled situations and take markets.
Now, India's MSMEs are often called the backbone of the economy, but are we structurally treating them like strategic national assets or still as informal afterthoughts?
So, for a long time, we thought of the MSME sector as some sort of an informal group of people who need protection from these big bad companies, and sort of, the entire socialist kind of mindset, in just like we were thinking about, povertarian kind of thinking, in the same way, oh, those poor MSMEs that need protection. And now there are indeed areas where MSMEs compete with large companies and there are unfair practices. But for the most part, MSMEs actually have a positive relationship with large companies. They tend to be either users of inputs from large companies or suppliers to large companies. Similarly, the idea of small companies, it's not that they remain eternal midgets, but that out of this milieu of small companies, you begin to get companies that become bigger and scale up. So we have historically tried to think of this purely in a protectionist kind of way, that somehow these small companies must be kept small, protected and retained in some sort of this kind of a scenario. Now we think of this as in fact a part of the ecosystem that allows Indian champions to emerge. Some of those will emerge from small companies becoming bigger.
Absolutely.
Others will be part of the ecosystem of the big companies, so that as we go out there and create global champions. So I think the entire thinking process we have about MSMEs as something that somehow need to be protected and continue to sort of remain in the sort of informal, low technology ecosystem forever, that thinking process we have broken away from, and we have begun to see the MSMEs as a much more positive input into a modern economy.
So on that note, can you tell us what specific structural or regulatory reforms do you believe will most empower MSMEs to scale and integrate into formal growth engines?
So there have been many reforms in recent times that the idea was to create that level playing field. The single most important thing to recognize is the creation of better physical infrastructure. See, the large companies can use the infrastructure that they have created.
Sure.
The MSMEs are dependent on publicly provided infrastructure. So simply creating better highways, airports, ports, smoothing the processes, customs processes, all of these are absolutely critical for an MSME. So this is one big thing. Secondly, we have made a lot of effort in trying to simplify ease of doing business, regulations and so on.
Right.
Now here, one part of the problem was that a large part were outside the system in the first place. So this meant that there had to be an effort, first of all, to bring them into the formal economy in the first place. As part of that, of course, we have done many things in order to allow for financial inclusion. There have been efforts to register companies and bring them on board in various ways. GST has been a big effort to bring all of them into the formal umbrella. Now we recognize, however, that once you bring them in, then you have to create systems that work, and this is an ongoing and continuous effort. So we created a GST. Now certain loopholes were found. That has meant that registration in GSTs went back to being more complicated. Now we are trying to make it again simpler.
Sure.
So this is an ongoing thing, but this is something we understand that there are frictions in the system and that they need to be continuously eased. In this context, I am personally a part of a big effort in the government of doing something called process reforms. Basically, everybody loves these big structural reforms, but in fact, for an MSME, where the rubber hits the road is these small frictions, small rules. There will be some rule number 43C, subsection D somewhere, which causes some friction in that particular sector.
Sure.
And so a big effort is being made to literally dig into these things and pull them out and try and remove these frictions in the system. Now, some of those are at the central level, a lot of them at the state level.
Yep.
But I think there has to be a greater sympathy for this in the bureaucracy and even in the judiciary that you need to smoothen these things for the MSMEs.
Sure. And how do you view the current landscape for women-led MSMEs? Are we moving in the right direction?
I think in general, women face all the same problems as the men. There may be some extra need for mentorship, which I think there is a lot of now efforts in that direction. So mentorship is an important area, but there are now lots of women entrepreneurs that have come up. And I think for the most part, the problems they face, whether it's bureaucratic delays, unnecessary interference by various kinds of government inspectors, delays in customs, infrastructure problems and so on, they're by and large mostly the same that male entrepreneurs face.
It's time for a quick break. Here we'll be back shortly. Stay tuned. Welcome back to IDFC First Bank Presents Leaders of Tomorrow Season 13, and you're watching our Independence Day special episode. Tonight we're exploring bold ideas, strategic reforms and the India story with Sanjeev Sanyal, member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister. Do you think India's MSME sector can move from being employment heavy to innovation heavy?
I think a lot of it has got to do with mindset. We tend to think of MSMEs as, people who are, employing a tiny number of people in some workshop doing some low technology thing. Now, I have nothing against, carpentry workshops and furniture. All of those are important. But at the same time, all of these activities can be done in a high-tech way. So I think we need to get out of our mental, this is partly a cultural problem, that we somehow don't think of small companies as being high-end companies.
Sure.
Whereas worldwide, there are some very valuable companies that in terms of number of people employ very few people or start out small but then grow. So I think we've got to stop thinking of MSMEs as some sort of informal sector that, as I said right in the beginning, that needs continuous protection, to begin to think of it as an ecosystem that throws up all kinds of risk-taking, some of which may scale up dramatically.
Right.
So, there's this whole effort about Startup India, and there's a lot of schemes now for trying to scale up MSMEs. This is really the order of the day. To think of an MSME should not be thought of as a midget. It should be thought of as an infant that can grow, or a part of an ecosystem that allows for rapid growth to happen.
Right. And Mr. Sanjeev, what does being Atmanirbhar really mean today, especially when we talk about strategic economic self-reliance? How can businesses contribute meaningfully to that vision without turning inward?
So first of all, we have to get away from this idea of Atmanirbhar in sort of autarkic sense that everything has to be produced in India and everything has to be. Now, there are obviously areas like defense or areas where we strategic importance where we want to be self-reliant from a purely internally driven sense. But for the most part, Atmanirbhar really means the confidence to go out and deal and innovate. And a lot of these may require us to take technologies from the rest of the world, to import inputs. I don't think we should think about it in a purely Atmanirbhar, in a purely sense of, in the 1950s sense of import substitution. As I said, there are areas where we want to do import substitution, but this should never be done in the old sense of allowing for shoddy workmanship and shoddy products and low technology just for the sake of being Atmanirbhar.
Absolutely.
Atmanirbhar means being self-confident more than in the old import substitution sense. So self-confidence in our own technologies, self-confidence in being able to innovate further, self-confidence in being able to go outside India and conquer export markets. So I think it has to be done in a more outward-oriented, aggressive sense rather than the old defensive mindset that we have historically had.
And what about when it comes to smaller towns and rural areas? How can they also benefit from India's economic growth story, not just the big cities, but smaller towns as well?
So, of course, the first and obvious problem is that we had to get basic infrastructure into these areas. You see, and this is particularly true of the eastern half of the country that hasn't grown quite as fast as the western half of the country. India's real gap is between east and west, not north and south. And in this context, let me say that a lot of new effort is being put in for creating basic infrastructure, the highways, the airports, electricity supply has to be good, and so on. So first of all, that has to be done. And then the next thing that has to be done is to change the culture. See, the problem was that for a long time, we culturally did not look at entrepreneurship as something positive. Even if you read the textbooks till very recently, you would read in the textbooks, what do you read about? Hoarders, and there are fair price shops. In the entire context of how we thought of entrepreneurs as something, dodgy happens and the government needs to intervene to do it. Now that culture is now being changed, where entrepreneurship is being seen as something positive. We are changing even the textbooks to bring positive aspects of risk-taking, business, and so on. So this is a very important thing. And otherwise, what you're seeing in small towns is this obsession with taking UPSC exams. Why is that? 99.9% of people taking UPSC exams are not going to get through.
Right.
It's actually far more likely to fail in that effort than you are if you set up a business. And yet, in smaller towns, people have this obsession with doing something where you are almost sure to fail, this UPSC obsession. So this happens because we have created a culture where their obsession about being in government jobs, whether for positions of power or for rent seeking or because of the mental image of safe jobs, I'll leave you to think.
Sure.
But the point I'm making is this entire culture has to be changed in particularly the eastern half of the country, places like Bihar, and think of entrepreneurship, risk-taking, innovation as being really the cutting edge. Now this change has already happened in places like Bangalore. Mumbai always had an entrepreneurial culture. Gujarat had an entrepreneurial culture. Seeing in Delhi, NCR as well, you have increasingly a culture of risk-taking and going out. But there are large parts of the country where, particularly in small towns, the culture remains hankering for government jobs, and I think that culture has to change. And the way to do that is to celebrate our risk takers, celebrate our businessmen, and of course the bulk of our business and risk taking and innovation community is in the MSMEs.
So Mr. Sanjeev, we are celebrating Independence Day today, but looking ahead to India at 2047, how do we then embed entrepreneurial thinking, especially among the youth, into our long-term national growth story? What kind of ecosystem do we need to nurture that mindset early?
So of course, at the first instant, we need to change our rules, regulations, and the mindset that is embedded in our government systems, the rules, regulations, which become much more business friendly. And so that is the first instance. And as I said, putting a lot of effort into process reforms. The Honorable Prime Minister is very keen that we create an India that is business friendly. Ease of living, ease of doing business has to be key. So that is one big thing. But at the second order, this has to be done by society. Society has to celebrate our risk takers, entrepreneurs and innovators. And when I say this, I'm not only meaning MSMEs in the sense of people who are doing business. Risk taking is a culture. Our sportsmen are taking risk. Our writers, our actors, our poets, all of them are risk taking in some way.
Yeah.
So a culture of risk taking is a wider thing than just MSMEs, and MSMEs live in that environment. So that ecosystem of culture has to be changed. And unfortunately, for a very long time, maybe because we were first colonized and then lived in this very socialist tilted environment, we did not celebrate our risk takers. There was always a sense that, those who are taking risk are somehow doing something that is not kosher, we must tax them or regulate them and so on. So this change in mindset has to ultimately come from society, because in the end, policymakers, politicians and so on ultimately respond to what the people want. And until there is an appreciation that wealth creation is a good thing, risk taking is a good thing, you will not get this change in mindset, and you will not even get the change in policies.
Well, absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Sanjeev.
Thank you.
With that, it's a wrap on this edition of IDFC First Bank Presents Leaders of Tomorrow Season 13. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for watching, and here's wishing all our viewers a very happy Independence Day.